kwa kugusa huko. Kuna sehemu kwa kugusa kusikiliza kupitia huko.
Yes, Eric, please go ahead. Just unmute yourself. I had to mute everybody because we could still hear a lot of background noise.
Sure, you're right. So thank you very much also for hosting this session and for the kind introduction as well. My work will be to take you through the legal ways and particularly on this COVID-19 and how probably could respond to it. So we have prepared a presentation. So I can't say that a detailed one, but a presentation to care for that. To start with, our presentation will cover about 10-11 areas which we think could be relevant to both employer and employee. And those will cover the basic overview of the employment and labor laws in Tanzania, then the employer-employee relationship during this pandemic, and then we'll look at the types of leave, and then, of course, the most exciting part will be the leave without pay, salary reduction, loss of business, retrenchment, and of course, also disciplinary hearing during this when probably employees are away at home. And then we'll finalize with the rights of employees as well as employment compliance issues and way forward. So as such, now the most important aspect maybe in most cases are asking is whether the employer can resort into reduced pay or termination or retrenchment or for unpaid leave during this pandemic. So those are some of the key questions that we will look at and try to address them. So to start with, we will look on how does the law provide generally what are the laws that govern employment in Tanzania. So the employment and labor laws in Tanzania are basically categorized into two. We have laws that govern public servants, and we have laws that govern both public servants and private servants, or private sector employees. So the public servants, we have three laws. We have Public Service Act of 2002. We have Public Negotiation Machinery Act of 2003, and we have Teacher Service Commission. Also, for private servants or employee in a private sector, we basically have two laws. We have Employment and Labor Relations Act of 2004 with its two regulations, the famous one being the Code of Good Practice, and we have Labor Institution, which mainly govern the dispute resolution mechanism for employment issues. And now, the other aspect that we are looking at is the employer-employee relationship in a situation now, for instance, on a COVID-19 pandemic. So generally, as such, the law in Tanzania is silent on issues of pandemic. There's no any provisions of the law that discuss or addresses issues of pandemic. So what happens then if we don't have the law? So what happens is we have to go through the law, trying to interpret it, and that's the whole point of this webinar today, navigating the way through how we can deal with such a situation. So as such, and the minimum point is we don't have, the law does not speak anything about pandemic and but this kind of situation. So what our role is now to interpret going through the law to see how we can deal with such a situation. Now, that being the case, we'll have to look on the possible ways out. So we look at the type of leave. Now, under our Employment and Labor Relations Act, we have 5 types of leave. We have annual leave, which is 28 days granted to employee, but of course, this is granted to employee who has worked for more than 6 months. So employee who is less than 6 months is not entitled to annual leave. And then we have, of course, maybe a point to note, in 2015, there was a changes that allowed the employer to pay employee in lieu of going to leave. So before, the employer could not pay employee to stay for the annual leave. But now employer and the employee, of course, can negotiate, and the employer can pay the employee instead of going to leave, he can pay. Now we have sick leave, but now more important aspect here to note, sick leave is entitled to employee subject to producing a medical certificate from a medical practitioner. So it's not automatically that, well, I'm sick, I sit back at home, then employer will know that I am sick. You must produce a medical certificate from medical practitioner saying that you are sick. And once you are sick, you have 126 days. It means you have 63 days for full pay and 63 days for half pay. Please note, these 126 days are applicable within 3 years, 36 months. It's not like every year you have 126 days. No, it's after every 3 years. Now we have paternity leave, which is granted to fathers, which is 3 days, leave within 7 days for the birth of the child. And also we have maternity leave, which is granted to mothers with a newborn, which is 84 days for one child and 100 days for twins. Now, and then the last one, we have compassionate leave, which is 4 days for every sickness or death of a child. If it's a child, you are allowed to go for 4 days for sick or death. But if it's a spouse, parent, grandparent, grandchild, it's only death, not sick. So the point that we are trying to say here is all these kind of leave, the 5 types of leave, are paid leave. In case when an employee goes for this leave, he must be paid. It is not whether the employer will discuss whether to pay or not, but employer must pay for annual leave, for maternity leave, for sick leave, for paternity leave, and compassionate. So there's no discussion about payment here. So these 5 types of leave are paid leave. Now, let's look now in a situation where we want to explore the unpaid leave. Now, leave without pay is a leave taken by an employee without being paid salary. So we have seen the 5 types of leave where employer must pay employee. Now, closely looking at Section 30 of the Employment and Labor Relations Act, it says that employer and employee can agree to any form of leave must not prejudice paid leave. So for instance, I'll give you an example. The law says maternity leave is 84 days. Of course, the employee can be, can agree with the employee. It can give you maybe, let's take 90 days or 100 days, depending on how employees negotiation would be. But even if you agree to alter such days or such leave days, then it must be paid. Another example, an employer can agree with, for instance, you can agree maybe compassionate leave. Maybe it's the death of maybe one of your spouse. Maybe 4 days, likely can be very short days. Employer can give you another 10 days, go grieve at home, and something like that. So in case there's any such changes, such changes should not prejudice paid leave. So in other words, you can agree for more days, you can agree for additional days, but that should be paid. So that's the general rule. So generally, there's no provision in the law, in the Employment and Labor Relations Act, that provide for unpaid leave. That being the case, the issue relating to payment, paid or unpaid leave, it should be by mutual agreement. So it cannot be by unilateral, like, okay, please today go for unpaid leave. It should be by mutual agreement, meaning that an employer cannot take unilateral decision to change or to make changes to the employment contract without the consent of the employee. So that being the case, an employer cannot force employees to go on a on unpaid leave. Now, how about salary reduction? Likewise, the law does not provide for salary reduction as well. So Employment and Labor Relations Act prohibit the employer from changing the terms of employment without prior consultation with the employee. You should all be mindful that here we are talking about employment contract. So it's a contract between employer and employee. That being the case, remember, employer cannot change the terms of the employment without consulting employee. So for instance, if between me and you had agreed you would do this, I cannot come and change the terms of employment without terms of the contract without consulting you. So that being the case, an employer must mutually consult and agree with the employee on salary reduction. So here what we are cautioning employers is they should refrain from such salary reduction without prior consultation and mutual agreement with the employee. Now it can be directly with the employee or by the trade union. Now a trade union, as you know, is a representation of the employees. So once he agrees with the trade union, basically then he can enforce that one. Or with the employee, then he can enforce that one. Therefore, it is very important to note that any changes to the employment contract must be consulted and basically must be in writing. Now, another aspect that is relevant to note is the loss of business. What happens when there's a loss of business? So, loss of business in one way or the other by employer through maybe loss of profession, death, or whichever, then that one automatic lead to termination of employment. So employees should be aware that when, for instance, in a pandemic situation like this, maybe employer automatically loses business, then it goes without saying that that is automatically automatic termination of employment. Now, another aspect, interesting aspect to look at is retrenchment. Now, what is retrenchment? Commonly, most people as you're aware, refer it as redundancy or termination of employment by employer. Now, termination of employment contract retrenchment is a termination of employment contract by the employer by operation requirement of the business, meaning that a business circumstance may force employer to terminate employees from employment. That can be from economic reasons, for instance, due to financial management, and in particular in situations like this where employer is running probably under loss, there's no customers, no business at all. So that employer can enforce retrenchment. And then there can be reasons coming from technological reasons. Probably there's a new technology coming up that makes maybe some jobs to be redundant, then retrenchment can be applied. And then there could be another reasons for retrenchment can be from structural requirement of the business, for instance, such as merger and acquisition, or change altogether of the business nature that probably does not require certain kind of employees. So retrenchment must be justified by the employer and cannot be invoked from the air. Employer must specifically come out with a reason. Why is he retrenching? Why is he reducing employees? Or why does he terminate employees from employment? That can be either, for, as we say, economic reasons, technological reasons, or structural needs of the business. Now, retrenchment, according to the law, retrenchment is a procedural process. It's not something that is an employer simply invoking. It's a procedural process. Being a procedural process, employer must follow the guidelines provided by the law. And one of the key requirements is sufficient notice of the employer. Employer must give sufficient notice to the employees. Why is he undergoing through retrenchment? Also, employer must disclose the relevant information. Why is he undergoing through the, because failure to give reasons, failure to disclose the relevant information relating to the retrenchment can be challenged and can be seen as unfair termination of employment. So also the employer must consult as such, must consult with the employees as to the reason, and then measures that can minimize intended retrenchment, probably maybe, as we say, maybe salary reduction or taking another roles in the organization and something like that. And then the method for selection of the employees who would be applied for retrenchment. For instance, the law says employer can use LIFO, last in, first out. So that could be a criteria. Why are you selecting this? Why did you select 12 employees? Employer can say, those were the last people that I employed, so I have considered them for the retrenchment. And the timing must be accurate, I mean, must be communicated, but also employees must be informed of the severance pay. Briefly, severance pay is the payment that is paid to the employees from the termination of employment, and it is paid 7 days for every year of service, for every completed year of service, meaning 12 months. And then during retrenchment, there must be sort of a joint solving exercise between employer and employee to see the best way out of retrenchment. So, and in case the employer wants to hire back employees, the priority should be given to the employees that were retrenched. Now, another exciting things to look at, for instance, during this pandemic, and which is relevant to employers, is how would the employer conduct or handle disciplinary hearing to employees that probably are working from home, or of course that are not in the vicinity of the employment, within the vicinity of the offices. So basically, according to the law, the law does not provide for hearing of disciplinary hearing through using technology. So that what happens then? Then it means the employer must follow the laid down rules, which basically require at least an employer must have done some investigation. He must serve an employee with the notice why such disciplinary action should be taken, and then should give time and place, and date where the disciplinary will be taken, and then employee must also be given an opportunity to present, to choose another person to represent him during the hearing, or where possible, a trade union representative. So as you can see, since the law is basically silent on probably using of a technology, then there is some challenges there. But clearly from the law, if we read Section 99 of the Employment and Labor Relations Act, we see that the law allows employer at least to depart, to have flexibility on that, but employer must justify the grounds for such departure. You must give out reason. Why did you probably have employee on a one-to-one meeting room during disciplinary hearing? You must justify for that. You must have very good reasons why you are departing from the laid down procedure. So still there is a challenge which is yet to be addressed by the law, but somehow the law also provides some flexibility on that. Now, the other thing is what probably would be the rights of employee suffering from this pandemic. The first important aspect that you should know from the Employment Labor Relations Act is the law prohibits discrimination, any form of discrimination, including discrimination from health status. That one is totally prohibited. Of course, the employee is also entitled to sick leave, but subject to producing medical certificate from a medical practitioner. And as you know, employees' information is treated as confidential. So we expect that employer would not publicly share the employee's health status regarding his health status, maybe from the pandemic. Now, what are the important compliance issues coming out from this pandemic, especially from between the employer and the employee? We are seeing and likely seeing that there's an occupational safety and health act, which is a resultant from the government directives, for instance, on the use of face masks, washing hands, using hand sanitizers. Also, there's an aspect of social distancing, office occupancy, how will that likely to be enforced by the government. And the other key aspect is on the payroll, that will affect the payroll services, including like where there's unpaid, where there's salary cut. These are the key issues that need to be addressed. For instance, you need, let's for instance see NSSF. NSSF will always follow up. Why didn't you pay the salary maybe for March, April? Why did May? Why didn't you submit? So employer must somehow have document where there's such salary cut, well documented, to ensure that whenever there's a compliance requirement, then there's a backup document or information that an employer can justify. And then, now the last item is, what is the way forward out of this? The way forward out of this is, number one, and that should be on the any employer and probably employee back of the mind, is there must be bilateral consultation between employer and employee. So nothing can be done without consultation between the employer and the employee, and that there must be a consent by the employer and the employee, either to take unpaid leave or to take salary cut or any measure that would affect the employment contract. Then it is relevant for employer to document all necessary communication to avoid circumstances where it could be seen that action taken by employer were based on the unilateral action by the employee, because that can be challenged in a CMA, Commission for Mediation and Arbitration, or for unfair termination of employment. And then employers must also review and update their policies. It's relevant. For instance, this is critical for when it comes for employment, for instance, for sickness. We know there's when this issue involved the COVID-19 involved, one of the measures is for probably coming out of it is self-isolation. But you see, Section 32 requires employee must have a medical certificate from the medical practitioner. So employers may need to think of this, update maybe their policies, maybe to address issues of self-isolation. And then employers may also wish to adapt task-based employment contract rather than term-based employment contract. For instance, you agree with the employee that you will perform this task, and once the task is completed, then your contract is finished, rather than having maybe 3 years contract, 5 years contract, and something like that. So it's something that the employer may think of. And then it's relevant for the employer also to inform and make sure that they cater for compliance of the law. Remember, here we are talking, for instance, on payroll, NSSF, higher learning student loans board. We are talking of payee, SEL, and all this. Sometimes, for compliance reasons, you might be audited and found like you did not submit the salaries. Then you must have justifiable reasons why salaries were not paid, why employees were subjected to leave, and all these issues. And other possible mandatory compliance that we are seeing from our government involving, for instance, from the directives that actually was issued by the Occupational Safety and Health Authority on 21st, that emphasize on precautionary measures such as wearing face masks, installing hand washing facilities, use of sanitizers, social distancing, and the like. And then employers, under the law actually requires employers to avoid possible retrenchment measures. Of course, it does not prohibit employers to do that, but it requires employers to be careful when in resorting to retrenchment. So employers must be very careful and must follow all the procedures provided under the law to avoid possible filing of case or possible legal implication coming out of that. And then where the issues where employer need to depart from any possible guidelines under the law, then employer must have justified reasons why he's doing that. So briefly, this is my presentation that has covered those areas, and I'll be very glad to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric, for the wonderful presentation and very informative. I know you guys have a lot of questions, but before we go to that session, we have another presenter. He's going to join us in, and then we'll go for a Q&A session. So just hold on to the questions that you have. If you think you'll forget, just write them down on the chat box, and then we will go through them on the Q&A session. Peter, are you around? Peter? Peter, can you hear us? Okay, let's just give Peter a few minutes. Perhaps I can just start with the introduction of Peter. He was just around here. Peter is the Managing Director and CEO of EPVET and Fortune International Consulting. He is currently the member of the Board of Directors for Air Tanzania Limited. And he has been the Director of HR and Administration from 2012 to 2019 for TPB Bank, Director of HR and Administration for Tanzania Post Corporation, Head of Training and Development, Chief Manager for TPB Bank, and Acting Organizational Effectiveness Manager for Barrick. And of course, he was the HR General Superintendent. He has also been the HR consultant for Vodacom Tanzania, HR executive for UTEG Tech Enterprises, and AO for RD University. Peter has over 16 years of experience in strategic HR, performance management, change management, organizational development, HR policy development implementation, industrial relation, HR consultant, and leadership management training. He has worked in various industries such as telecom industry with Vodacom, mining, African Barrick Gold Mining, RD University, former UClass, and clearing and forwarding industry. He also has been a teacher at Tabata Kimanga Secondary School from 2002 to 2002. From 2000 to 2002. He's a seasonal consultant and trainer with Tanzania Institute of Bankers Association for East Africa, Umoja Switch, and has been an instrumental in various HR forums, both in Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Zanzibar. He's also an inspirational speaker, youth mentor, coach, and leadership, life skills and management. Peter, so you can go ahead with the presentation, and then once you're done, we'll go for Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a great opportunity. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Naike. My part shall be actually the other side of the coin for Eric. As we all know, legal and HR are two sides of the same coin. I'm going to actually add on what actually my colleague has actually presented. Navigating through employment law under COVID-19, employer-employee relationship. I'm going to cover the HR perspective to business and people. We all know navigation is actually one of the key competence of HR in modern corporate world. Actually, if you look at those different competencies, actually 9 competences under the HR Global Institute. Navigation is one of the role of HR. So we are going to see how HR can help institutions during this COVID to navigate and still make profit. We all know in corporate world, business leaders expects HR and business managers to make sure that they get their shareholders the bottom, the value for the business. This doesn't matter whether if the situation is not good like now in the COVID. So the role of HR is very insurmountable. So what are the key issues to consider during the COVID-19? First of all, we need to look on our laws, which should actually be aligned to the business. Helik has already actually spoken about this. We need to actually review our policies. Basically, policies are supposed to make sure they cover the foreseeable and unforeseeable events. They should actually be tools to help the institutions to move to the right direction. If you look at organization, normally in the strategic management, institutions should have vision, mission, values, belief, goals or objectives, and policy. So the employment laws provide a frame for institutions to develop policies which could actually help them to navigate accordingly. Eric has covered very powerfully in the first part that whatever decision an institution should make should actually have a base. And the right base is actually the policy. So it's high time that our institutions should actually revise our policies to make sure they support the business, especially during this particular moment of COVID-19. The other important thing is actually our policies should actually reflect the operating environment. Here I'm talking about internal environment and external environment. External environment could actually be like issues of culture, social, political, economic, the COVID also as well. Internally, we could talk about the issue of structure, policy, employees, systems, tools, and all those kind of stuff. Basically, when you talk about employment laws or policies, we talk about the means. You know, most of the times HR, the traditional HR, we have put more emphasis on the means and we have forgotten the end, which is actually the business. Basically, in modern corporate world, policies or HR is just the means to an end, which is actually the business. So it's high time as well, HR should actually navigate from traditional way of doing things, coming to a modern way of doing things where actually we should support institutions to be able to navigate and attain the corporate objective. In an organization, normally we have different sources of production. I usually call them 5M, where man, machines, material, money, and methods. We all know HR is the core resource. And during this pandemic year, the most affected mode of production is actually people. Because actually, we are told institutions should actually reduce employees in order to be able to navigate during this particular time. So how do you handle this from HR perspective? My colleague actually covered on the area of legal. I'm gonna cover on the area of people perspective. What the research says about COVID. One, COVID shall stay for a long time or period. This is actually a fact. So institutions need to adopt and see how they can navigate through this pandemic and still provide value to the business owners. Number three, organizations need to consider the software and the hardware. The software is actually how do we relate with our employees? How do we take actions? How do we, take, these measures of either laying off employees or reducing salary or, terminating employment of our employees. Remember, these employees can either come back to our organizations when the performance of our institutions are stabilized. So what are the HR perspectives under COVID? Number one, employee engagement. Jack Welch says employee engagement has to do with three perspectives: mind, heart, hand. So we as business managers, we need to actually make sure we engage our employees during this COVID. We engage them using those three perspectives. This is imperative because, well, this employee may leave, but the history will be there. When you start the business, maybe if you hire new employees, they will hear that you mishandled, the employees who were there during the COVID. So it is very important. When we are managing this situation, we manage by using heart, hand, and mind. Remember, these employees have senses. They have thoughts, they have ideas, they can make also decisions. Jack Welch also says that we HR are pastors and parents. So when we are managing all these issues with regard to COVID, we should make sure that we play the role of a pastor and a parent. The other aspect which is very vital is sympathy and empathy. We should wear, the shoes of these people. We should not use this particular time to victimize employees, maybe to terminate employees who were actually, we were not happy with them. While we are doing all these, measures, we need to make sure there is that most good faith. Whatever decision we make it for the benefit of the institutions. We should not use our own, interest. Eric has covered as well on participation and involvement. We should actually make sure employees are fully participated and involved. Also consultation. The other important aspect is employee assistance and support program. We should see, if possible, how can we support these employees who are going to be laid off? Maybe to give them training on retirement, financial management, maybe give them capital, assist them, to come up with, entrepreneurial kind of opportunities. And then lastly is actually deployment. Some of these employees who are actually going to be laid off can be actually redeployed. So we need to make sure we handle them with care. So the other important thing to consider during this COVID is actually the use of technology. We all know the world now is moving from IT to DT. We are now actually moving to data technology. So we need to make sure our institutions, as I've said earlier, 5M, money, methods, machines, materials. So we need to actually bring on board systems to help us to manage better our institutions. We should also as well consider artificial intelligence. Some people are saying, artificial intelligence will actually kill a lot of jobs. Yeah, this is a fact, but jobs that will be killed are jobs that Jack Ma calls them stupid jobs. But if we are smart, we are dynamic, we are agile, we are flexible, still we can work with the artificial intelligence. So these are things that actually we should consider, we as employers, during this COVID. The other aspect which is very vital is actually workforce agility and flexibility. It's high time now our policy should be actually amended or aligned to our business. You need to ask yourself, do we really need all these employees to come to work from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock? Do you need the IT people to come from 8 to 5? Do you need the accountants to come at 8 and 5? So these are times we as HR, we as business managers, we need to consider issues of flexibility and agility, as this could actually also help employees to have work-life balance, but also improve their performance at work. The other issue which is very vital is actually the issue of data. Data, as I've said, the world is moving actually from traditional perspective to modern way of doing things. So we need to have data at our workplace. With data, actually somebody can work even from home, and you can measure him or you can judge him based on the outcome, not activities. So it's high time, maybe our institutions should consider incorporating data management into our management system. With COVID-19 around us, we should actually also consider, trying to change our performance management systems, moving performance appraisal to management objectives. Have KPI in place, make sure employees are motivated, they are supported, and we should actually tell them we are not looking at activities, we are looking on the outcome. And this will actually help institutions to survive during this particular pandemic time. So what should be done by people manager during COVID-19 pandemic? Number one, learn and learn and relearn. We need to learn new things. We need to unlearn, the traditional things, and we need to relearn and make sure we are actually on top of the business. We have, the hands-on experience of how to support our institutions to be able to perform to expected level. Number two, we need to be proactive. Our policies should actually be able to address the current issues, the future issues, and all the unforeseeables that could actually happen. We should not be reactive. We need to be able to see things beyond the normal way of looking at things. And how can we do this? We need to have strategic management principles within our institutions. The other factor is courage. We need to have courage. Some people have actually even closed their business. Some people have even died during this COVID. So we need to have courage. We need to say, this also shall pass. Yes, we can. Yes, I will. Yes, I'm gonna survive. But you need to have also, management principles, making sure that you give the motivation to employees, you encourage them, you support them, and you guide them. We need also to be adaptable. Let us not be rigid. We need to be flexible. As I've said earlier, the focus is the business, it's not the means. So we need to actually adjust ourselves, make sure that we are able to support our institutions to attain the corporate goal. So as I'm finishing, which path do you choose? We need to digitize the business operations. This is very critical so that we may be able to continuously provide value to the business stakeholders. Come up with flex hour systems in order to win the heart of our employees. I've heard a couple of organizations, they have actually, changed their systems. Some people are going on rotational kind of stuff when things are working. The other aspect, which is actually very important, is actually move the organization performance management from the appraisal system to performance management driven institutions. This will actually help people to, be considering the outcome and not activities. Last but not least, adopt metrics and analytics as a way of managing the business, as this actually is where the world now is going in this 21st century. Lastly, always check the temperature. You need to ask yourself a couple of questions. You need to do HR audit. You need to do organizational audit. Ask yourself, is the organization Is the organization digital? Do we have the right talents to move the organization to digital at this era? Are our business leaders and employees ready to change and adopt new way of doing things? So we need to actually do a sort of SWOT analysis of our institutions. Check on our strength, check on our weakness, check on our opportunities and threats, and make sure that we help our institutions to be more effective and efficient in executing their mission. This actually is my last slide. Thank you very much for listening. Looking forward for question and answers session. Naike, I'm done. The ball is on our side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the wonderful presentation. We'll share that as well for all those who registered. So now we're going to go to the Q&A session. The way we're going to do it is you can just raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask the question. Or you can also put on the chat box and I'll go through it. Let me start with the first question from Eliudi Kit Time. He's asking Eric, what is amendment on payment in lieu of annual leave? Cite, please.
Please allow me to respond to this. I will send you the citation shortly, maybe along with the presentation, because where I'm sitting now, I don't have access to my folders. So I will respond to this, but yes.
Okay, thank you. The next question was from Ceci Mesh. He's asking, the first question is, what happens when an employer changed the salary, but after consulting the employee, there was no mutual agreement? For example, if the employee refuses, what option does the employer have according to the law?
Employer or employee? Employer.
Employer, because you have tried to talk to the employer, there was no mutual agreement, the employee refuses. What option does the employer have according to the labor law?
Now, as we have seen, the labor law does not have a specific provision dealing with the salary reduction or salary cut. So basically everything done here is mainly on a mutual basis, mutual understanding, mutual agreement between the employer and the employee. So one of the best, of course, when both employees, for instance, refuses a salary cut and the employer is facing challenges on the payment of their salary, of course, the employer can retrench employees, and he can have a very good reasons for retrenchment. And you remember, one of the reasons for retrenchment is loss of the business, financial management, loss of the business. So employer can have still that opportunity. Employee, of course, stands more to lose because if he refuses, automatically employer will invoke retrenchment. And retrenchment is automatically total loss of the of employment by the employee.
Okay. Another question comes from Power Computers. He's asking, what happened when an employee was sick with a different sickness and then a family member got COVID-19 disease and that employee did not attend work for 1 month? How would you handle that kind of situation?
Yes, as maybe reiterating from what we had earlier presented, still the law has no specific specific provision dealing with this pandemic, and even the measures that are taken are purely medical measures and not measures addressed by the law. So, for instance, self-isolation is not nowhere provided in the law. So, in a situation like that, then it is the employer to weigh on the balance of the probabilities. What happens? Can I strictly enforce, for instance? Of course, the employer here can strictly enforce in terms of abscond from duty, or of course, if it's a leave, then there's no leave. Sick leave must have a medical certificate from the medical practitioner. So still the employer has more options to weigh, but it is now the balance of probabilities, I mean, a balance of convenience to look between employer and employee.
Okay, now we're going back to the floor. If you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask the question. We would like to hear from you, please, as well. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, I said the question there, but I just want to ask it directly.
Yes, please go ahead.
That the laws which are presented by Mr. Eric apply to the public sector employees or only to the private sector? And again, I asked if for those who are employed on short-term basis, like 3 months, 6 months, do the law apply to those as well? Thank you.
Thank you.
In my on my first slide or second slide, I noted that there are 2 types of laws in Tanzania. There are laws that applies to employees in public sector and employee in private sector. But for instance, Employment and Labor Relations Act apply to both public sector and private sector. But however, the public sector have additional laws that governs, and for instance, your Public Service Commission. Public Service Act of 2000. So, in addition to the general standards that are laid on, under the Employment and Labor Relations Act, still employees in public sector have the laws that governs them.
Thank you. I see somebody has raised their hand. Mr. Irfan Walji, can you go ahead with your question? Unmute yourself and then we can hear you.
Thank you. So this is a bit of a twofold question. One is we know that the OSHA has regulatory and executory roles, and most of the times they're busy with their executory role and not so much in the regulatory aspect. How do you think that the OSHA laws and the statutory guidelines and requirements can help make our health and safety more robust? How does it protect an employee from contracting the virus at work? And the second part is, we know that this pandemic has really brought the limelight into what is occupational health and how it can be used as a very integral part of the management system, especially with HR and the like, in making employees safe, but also having a safe return to work. How do you see that the laws in Tanzania can accommodate or make it more friendly, but also make it a requirement to have occupational health specialists in the market?
Well, thank you very much. Well, briefly to say on your first questions, it's true that OSHA has both regulatory and executory role, but probably, as you can see, one thing that should be on the back of your mind, this is a pandemic. It is something that was never been contemplated by any law, by any person, that situation will be like this anyhow. However, if you read the OSHA Occupational Safety Act, its regulations, the regulations are very clear on safety and healthy of the working premises or working areas. For instance, the law requires employer to make sure that it provides necessary tools, facilities for the execution of the job. And if you look recently in their website, OSHA have come up with a sort of a guidelines, kind of like enforcing what is being provided or what is addressed by the Ministry of Health. And one of them that actually they have emphasized is wearing face masks employer probably should provide or install hand washing facilities, use hand sanitizers, and avoid unnecessary gatherings. But it also OSHA have required employers to protect both employers and employees against on all possible means precautionary and install precautionary measures against the spread of the disease. On your second question regarding on the limelight of safe working areas, safe working offices and the like, it is true there's a likely need now for having more professionals, but now probably it should be as broad as possible, not only addressing issues of COVID. Probably we should foresee other possible pandemic or possible human spread diseases or viruses that we need to be more cautious of. So probably this is as you said, is a limelight that we should take a learning experience out of this.
Thank you, Eric. There was another question coming from Elizabeth Kiwanga. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question to the person who can respond?
Okay, thank you, Nike.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, Elizabeth, we can hear you.
Yeah, I mean,
hello, Elizabeth, are you around?
thank you very much for
my question goes to Mr. Eric.
I think it's something which is
if an employee has COVID-19, but due to the self-quarantine cannot get the medical certificate, how does an employer handle this situation?
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yes, Section 32 of the Employment and Labor Relations Act requires that employer, for an employee to be entitled to sick leave, he must produce a medical certificate from the medical practitioner. Now, absence of that, strictly speaking on the law, absence of such medical certificate does not entitle employee to a sick leave, and automatically, probably employer can invoke other disciplinary measures, for instance, from absconding from duty or other possible disciplinary measures. So in this case, now there must be, as probably you've seen, that the law does not provide for this kind of pandemic. So here, the issue is how would the employer be reasonable on this issue. Of course, if there's a chance for employee to get this certificate, that would be better. But also, the issue is there must be reasonability in trying to enforce the law in this regard. But as probably you have noted in one of our recommendations in this one, is we have requested, I mean, as a way forward, it is our opinion that, for instance, it is high time for the employers to start reviewing their policies, their HR policies or their sick policies and the like. It is important because now to address issues where there's self-isolation, because self-isolation is meant to even protect those who have not contracted this disease. So it is very important for employers to take into consideration such issues.
Thank you, Eric. We have another question from Hassan Mshinda, who has raised his hand. Hassan, can you please go ahead and ask the question? Hello, Hassan, are you there? Hello, Hassan, are you there? Okay. It looks like he's not ready. We have another question from Salum Abdallah. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Okay. That one is not ready as well. I'm just going to go to the chat box. For a permanent contract basis, how is retrenchment done? And what can be observable during this COVID-19 period? That question came from Ayamabo Karamaga.
I will address here. You see, retrenchment is initiated by the employer. It is a situation where the employer wants to terminate employees from employment for specific reasons. It's not that, one thing you need to know, in Tanzania, there is no hire and fire. So in case the employer wants to terminate the employee, he must have reasons for that, either by retrenchment or by disciplinary issues. Now, retrenchment is an opportunity for an employer, or is a way an employer can terminate an employment of employees. Now, there must be 3 reasons, or probably there must be reasons for such retrenchment to be effective. One, it can be for financial reasons. Now, in a situation like this, in a pandemic situation like this, naturally we have noted that, or likely most of the employers have suffered serious financial constraints and the like. So they may use that as a reason. Or probably there's a technology, maybe after sometimes they just realize maybe there's better technology of working rather than simply having people around. So that could be another reason, of course. And there's another reason that is provided by the law that could be a structural reason. That can be maybe like merger or change of altogether of the nature of the business. So specifically what I'm trying to say here, despite of having those reasons, and retrenchment is a procedural process. It is not something that employer wakes up overnight and starts implementing retrenchment. And being a procedural process, it requires at least employer to give notice to employees that is intending to do retrenchment. He must give now the relevant information about the retrenchment, that the reason for the retrenchment is about because 1, 2, 3, we have new technology coming. So a certain department or certain employees will be affected. And then on top of that, he'll be required to consult with the employees if there's any possible ways of reducing the effect of the retrenchment, probably requiring people maybe to shift to other departments and something like that. And of course, the employer is required to discuss and agree on the method for selection. It cannot be arbitrary as like that. There must be a clearly selection process that is known to the employees. And of course, there is he must agree and they must provide for severance pay. Severance pay, as I already said earlier, it is a payment, it's a 7-day salary, a 7-day pay for every year of service. So for instance, if you have worked for 6 years, then you'll be entitled to 7 days salary for each year of service. And it must be completed 12 months. It cannot be, maybe you only work for 3 months and then say, no, I'm entitled, I've worked for 6 years and 3 months. Then those 3 months will not be calculated. So employer can invoke at a retrenchment provided it follows and it justifies the retrenchment.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to go back to Peter to give you a break a little bit. Okay. Peter, you have a question from Amable. She's asking, will it be convenient to have a full automation on KPIs such that a person's objective is measured against the output? Because now we are going into COVID-19 situation. we cannot really manage the, the employees remotely. Is there an automation on KPIs where you measure the person's objective against the output? Peter? Okay. Peter, are you around?
Yeah, very much for the question. Hello.
Yes, we can hear
Hello.
you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello. Yeah, I'm saying, okay.
Peter, are you around? Peter, can you hear us? Okay, I think Peter is experiencing some technical issues. I will go back to Eric. There is a question for you. Eric, paternity leave, is it only for one wife, or what matter is the father? Something like that. This question came from Linda. Maybe perhaps Linda, you can clarify your question. Eric, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Yeah, did you get the question? Talking about, yeah, the question was on paternity leave. Is it only for one wife, or what matter is the father? Linda, if you're around, can you also clarify the question? But I just read it as it is.
Very good question. The law does not address on the number of wives. It only gives the employee the right of 3 days leave within 7 days. But remember, it must be a legal wife. So if you're, for instance, you are entitled to more than one wife, and those are legal wives, then you'll be entitled. But mind you, the law is limiting to 4 children. The law is limiting to 4 children.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Another question came from member. He's asking, does sending text message that the employer is going to cut down salaries or reduction of manpower the right procedure?
No, please, because first let's go back to the basics here. Remember, employment is a contract. That's why, for instance, for most of you, you had time to negotiate your contract. Please, I need this, I need this, I need this. And finally, you agree and you sign your contract. Now, that is a contract. Now, anything that is affecting changes to that contract, it as well must be in writing. It cannot be simply by SMS and the like. But, however, if you all agree that SMS is the platform that you usually communicate, depending on the nature of your job, then that would be accepted. But for HR and HR professionals, please make sure that there's a compliance issue here, that you'll be required to show, in case there's a case, what measures did you apply to enforce the measures that you have taken. So it's very easy to challenge SMS, to challenge flimsy ways of communicating, because it may be very difficult to substantiate them in law or in court.
Okay, thank you. I think, Peter, you're back in. Can you respond to the question that was asked earlier on automation of KPIs against the person's output?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the automation for the KPI from the planning stage to the, hello, do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you, Peter. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm saying it's possible to do the automation from the KPI settings to the appraisal, even to the reward as well. For instance, in the banking, for instance, for let's say tellers, you can be able to actually, at the end of the day, see how many transactions she has made and of which value. So it's possible to do the automation for a KPI for the organization. And it's not very much expensive right now. You can use very short money and then you can actually do the automation. Automation is very important at this point in time, especially for managing the performance of the organization.
Thank you, Peter. I think there was another question from Sia. Sia, if you're around, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Eric answered the first part of my question, but I had a second one asking about those who are employed in a very short period of time, like 3 months or 6 months. What is the procedure for their termination?
Eric, can you please respond?
Okay, sorry. The law is very clear. Employee under probation, their termination is very straightforward. It's not as stringent as provided for. So those in less than 6 months, first, they do not enjoy even any kind of leave until 6 months and above. So employee in 3 months, 2 months, whatever, they termination can be as straightforward as possible. However, remember, in Tanzania, let me insist again, there's no hire and fire. So the point is, you need to take all necessary measures, including informing the employee why such termination is to be invoked and necessary procedures for such termination.
Okay, thank you, Eric. There is another person who has raised their hand. Robin, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
All right, thank you very much for setting up all this. The question I have is, are foreigners entitled to repatriation package once terminated from employment?
Well, that's a very good question. Of course, the repatriation is where did you engage the employee? That's the meaning of repatriation. So if you had engaged the employee, let's say from UK, knowing that it's coming from UK, definitely you have to repatriate where the employee is coming from. You can't expect that a person from UK, you terminate an employee here in Tanzania and expect to go back to UK. So repatriation is a package, is meant to take where you actually engaged the employee. That's the meaning of repatriation.
Thank you, Eric. We have another hand from Asha. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question, Asha Mafita?
Hello, thank you. My question goes to Eric. I wanted to confirm if there are some other reason or selection criteria for retrenchment apart from LIFO and FIFO. Criteria such as maybe someone had bad performance or disciplinary issues and some other issues like that.
Thank you very, very much. As you have probably answered within yourself the answer, a performance issue is not, employee performance issue is not an issue for retrenchment. You see, retrenchment is meant for business. Of course, it could be a reason, for instance, maybe a certain department or business no longer sees a certain kind of department as no longer viable because maybe it's not producing or is not contributing to what is expected. So specifically, an employer needs to be as transparent as possible on the measures, on the selection criteria. But as the law provides, those are simply examples. LIFO, FIFO are examples. But the employer can use other possible selection criteria, probably based on the reason for such retrenchment. But specifically, retrenchment is not an opportunity for an employer as such to terminate using other disciplinary measures. However, an employer has a right to still, and with the consultation of the employees, on his back of his mind, that why has he selected certain employees. But mind you, it is relevant to note that there might be certain circumstances where, for instance, a specific department is totally closed. For instance, maybe you were selling, you had a very big supermarket with different departments, maybe clothes, shoes, and the like, and then all of a sudden you realize you are no longer interested to deal with shoes. So there might be a restructuring that requires maybe a total closure of a certain department. That will have to be justified that way, and not documenting that we retrenched because there was a performance issues of the employment. Because performance issues are handled by way of disciplinary action, not by retrenchment.
Thank you, Eric. Another question is asking, is having a written contract a must? If so, whose responsibility is it? Is it the employer or employee? And what if they both don't care about it? Is it punishable by law, or is there any penalties to it?
Yeah, the law requires, I would show you exactly the law. The law requires, for instance, it requires that there must be a written contract between employer and employee. Failure of which, if there's no employment contract, then it is unfortunate for employer, because all the provisions of the law would squarely apply to the employer. So if you don't have employment contract, then you definitely have very much advantage as an employee, because every provisions of the law would squarely fall upon the employer. Because let me, I think it is section, I will check on it. Yes, section 14. Section 14 requires that an employer, there must be a contract between employer and employee, and that contract must be documented. So specifically, if I may show you the screen here, it's tricky. Section 14 of the Employment and Labor Relations Act, it should have it says that there must be a written contract between employer and employee. So there could be type of that contract can be in two types, whether can be for specified period or can be for unspecified period. And you see specifically section 15 now provide for what should be provided in that written contract. You see, including the name, place of recruitment, job description, date of commencement, and all this. So basically, the law requires the contract to be to be written. If there's an unwritten contract, then the law will squarely apply to the employer. So employer will be bound to enforce the law as it is. The advantage of having a contract is then some issues can be negotiated, agreed upon, or can be altered according to the agreement between employer and employee.
Thank you, Eric. Now we're going to give you a break. Coming back to Peter, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Yes, we have a question from, sorry, Eric, can you please try to remove your screen because we cannot see Peter well? Okay, yeah, so the question is coming from Sharon. Many employees right now are hustling, especially private school, to make sure that the students sitting for national exams, there are some goals given, example, making sure that you produce 40 A's out of 45 candidates in your subject. So these employees are tense, they are working around the clock, seeking parents to share their lessons and all the materials to their kids. But all these are not smooth to teachers. I think they are anxious to the future. How could ELRA harmonize this situation? Yes, Peter? Okay. Peter, can you hear us? Okay. I think he'll come back again with this question. I think he's experiencing some technical problem. We have somebody who has raised his hand before. Salum, are you around?
Yes, I'm around.
Okay, can you please go ahead with your question?
Yes, I have two questions for Eric. One of it is during the COVID-19, when you work in places which have high risk, like the mining industry, you know that we stay in the camps, and employees are also taking advantages of the COVID-19. So they'll just call you, as you know that we work on the rosters. We take 3 weeks off and 6 weeks on, which have now changed because of the COVID-19 which is going on. We are extending the rosters. But employees have started taking advantages and calling us back that they have all the symptoms of the COVID-19s. But when we ask them to go to the appropriate hospitals or centers which have been allocated for the COVID-19 issues, most of them don't go. So kindly we have just agreed to be strict on the Section 32. Which is we have an employee has to provide a medical certificate showing that he was sick. Now the question comes, most of our employees tend to go to CMA, as you are all aware. So I wanted to know what will be the outcome of the CMA. Will it have any are we having any liabilities on that? That's the first question. Another one is you have talked about retrenchment as well. We are all aware that it's a process. So in the process, one of it is the employee involvement. Now, when it comes to that, we don't know. Right now, we even don't know if we are on which situation in Tanzania. So when we reach maybe at the level that we have to retrench employees, and as you're aware that you can't, first of all, you can't retrench an employee. I don't know if you can't terminate an employee who is on leave. And probably they will say that you have to close the working place, like the ones we are working, we are located at the camps. So how are you going to involve the employees? And most of the employees, some of them have manual works. It's not like all of them have access to internet or they can be communicated through Zoom. So I was asking what retrenchment processes can we take during this COVID-19? That's my second question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Eric, can you please respond?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting question, Salon. But one thing maybe I need to put a comment on that. I cannot not really determine what is the outcome of your case from CMA, because usually it is the court that decide and not me as a lawyer somehow. So my role is to guide you on the right procedures. Then it is the court that decides. So the merit and demerit are actually determined by the court. Now, specifically, maybe trying to respond to your question relating on strictly enforcement of Section 32 of the Employment and Labor Relations Act, which requires employers to demand a medical certificate. Yeah, it is true, and as noted, as we have noted in my presentation, it is clear that the law did not envisage this kind of pandemic. We don't know another sort of pandemic that will come. This one was health related, but we don't know what other sort of issues or human catastrophes that would come and affect us like this. So this issue has never been addressed through our laws. But now, since it's not addressed, it means we maintain the status quo, meaning what does the law provide? The law says when you are sick, you want to enjoy your sick leave under the law, then produce a medical certificate. So as maybe stricter employer would always demand that. Yes, you are sick, you have isolated yourself, you have no issues with that, but please bring your medical certificate. If you don't bring, then we will treat you as you have absconded from duty, which automatically is a disciplinary issue, which results into your termination. So it can be as strict as like that, but it is up now to the organization to see on the balance and balance of convenience. How is this issue? Is it abused? Is it genuine? Can you allow for that and something like that? And of course, as we have noted earlier, it is important for the employer now to look into this issue through amendment of their ELRA policies. And now, the other thing is your second question on retrenchment, whether you can terminate your, what is the suitable mode of terminating employees. Of course, you cannot terminate the employee who is on leave. The law does not allow that. So one of the effective measures that is required under the law is one, employer must communicate his intention to retrench staff. And of course, you have seen, for instance, in most of the organization, which we normally advise as well, is please try to make sure that on top of having the internal memos, use also media, use newspapers of wider circulation, but also inform employees. Don't simply sit and have internal memos and something like that. Have it as circulated as possible. But on top of that, now the catch is in consultation with the employees. Usually, it can be through employers' representatives, employees' representatives, which can be trade unions, and it must be registered trade union. If you don't have a registered trade union, it can't be simply an employee representative. The law does not recognize employee representative if it's not a registered trade union. So it must be a registered trade union, and the trade union then will negotiate on behalf of the employees. If that measure is not possible, then you have to engage employee on individual basis.
Thank you, Eric. Now I'll go back to Peter.
Yes.
Sharon, Sharon, are you around? Can you ask that question to Peter so that he understands? Sharon?
Yes, hello.
Yes, please go ahead with your question to Peter.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Peter.
Yes,
I
please.
have just a small question regarding these teachers and how they could be assisted or whatever by HELRA, because as you understand, all kids are at home, and for now, only universities and those candidates for Form 6 are going to be back soon. So these teachers, especially private schools, they have some goals, and unfortunately, the employment contracts for most of them starts from January and being renewed in December, where some results for class 4 and grade 7 are now out, and now it's the time for employee to assess him or herself. So now they are hustling, they are doing many events. Sometimes they wish to do miracles so that they could meet those goals, because the students are at home and national exams are there to stay. So how could HELRA harmonize this situation or advise or do anything maybe? Thank you.
I spoke about the issue of engagement, and they should actually drive the role of parent and pastor. I spoke about the role of a child as a parent and pastor. So we need to actually be flexible to accommodate those issues. We as employer, we are not mechanical. So we need to be specific issues according to having employees at work from, if at all, they who have actually students who are in need of support at home. For instance, it's high time a child can actually
It looks like we are having technical difficulties with Peter. I don't know if you can hear us. Peter?
mechanical. For instance, you can push an employee to come at work, but if his heart is not at work, nothing would happen. So I think the most important thing here is actually we as employers to sit with our employees, accommodate their specific needs, and allow them to actually have work-life balance. Maybe you can allow your employees to go home early, come work, and then go back home to support their students, because actually it has to have, a work-life balance kind of balancing.
Thank you, Peter. I have another question coming from Abella John. This is for Eric. Is it possible for an employer to do a retrenchment to all redundant employees that were realized because of the corona pandemic? Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. One of the important issues that is addressed by the law is Section 7. Section 7 of the Employment and Labor Relations Act prohibits any form of discrimination, So employer cannot discriminate or cannot terminate employees based on such ground at all, never at all.
Okay, and does this question comes from Mohammed? Does the unpaid leave have a time limit?
Yeah, very good question. There is no time limit for unpaid leave. However, when negotiating or when consulting with employees, there must be a definite period agreed when unpaid leave or salary cut can be invoked. You cannot have indefinite salary cut. It can never be. So when, for instance, maybe an employer can agree, maybe we will have 6 months, 6 months, 6 month salary or leave without pay, or 6 month salary reduction, because salary reduction or unpaid leave is aimed to mitigate certain business situation, but we are not expecting that would be the norm for going forward. Like, yes, from today onwards, this is your salary cut. That can be invoked specifically when an employer wants to retrench, and then one of the means for mitigating retrenchment is an agreeable salary cut. For instance, instead of you going to home completely and losing, maybe you are getting 10,000, but we can still work here and get 5,000. But that one should be specifically and clearly agreed as a resultant of maybe intended or as a mitigant for the retrenchment.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Another question from Amable. She's asking, is there any legal provision that supports work from home? How can a HR department suit itself to accommodate work from home concept?
There's no any provision that deals with any issues relating to working from home. Nowhere, you can work anywhere else. But now for occupational, for safety and occupational issues, then a workplace is defined. Like, okay, if you are now an employer or a registered employer, then you must comply to safety and occupational health issues. For instance, having maybe toilets, having water, provided minimum standard for any occupational issues. So there is no specific law, there's no specific requirement that provided where exactly should the employer be working. Can be working from anywhere. No wonder that's why you see people working from mining, underground, some working in towers, up high in the towers, whatever. So there is no specific as where the surrounding, the vicinity where the employer works, but should provide work. But if usually the law provides for safety and occupational requirement for any working area that is designated by the employer.
Okay, another question was from Robin. Does severance pay apply to all job categories as specified in the work permits?
Yeah, severance pay is an entitlement to any employee, which is 7 days for every month work. But there is exception to that. If employee is terminated for disciplinary issues, for misconduct, then is not entitled to severance pay.
Another question from Andrew. What does the law say when the employer has decided a pay cut without any mutual understanding with the employee, or by just sending a text to the employer? I think this was covered. Yeah.
Yeah, but then employee have a right to enforce that as part of the termination, unfair termination, because it affects the employment contract. As we said, there must be a bilateral mutual agreement between employer and employee, failure of which that will be seen as a termination of employment.
Okay. Another question from Felix. I hope we can cover all the questions. In the situation where the employer decides to make shift to employees to provide all days off must be counted or deducted from annual leave. Maybe after some time, an employee might find that he has utilized more than even annual leave. How does the law attend this, and practically, how can this be treated?
Now, you know, as we said, in a situation of pandemic like this, where employees have to think of the ways out, one of the ways legally provided under the law is annual leave. An employer can agree annual leave, then employees could go annual leave, but provided they are paid. Now, in a situation where annual leave is exhausted, then employer must think out of the best ways out of that. And one of the ways is now to sit with the employees and agree specifically where maybe we are taking unpaid leave or we are taking paid leave. Because the law, what is provided, for instance, for annual leave is the minimum requirement under the law. The law provides a minimum requirement that you will be working, you will have 28 days annually. So if you want more, you can agree with the employer that we agree 6 months annual leave, but it should be with pay, you see, because anything without pay must be by agreement. But also if you want to deviate from the law, you still sit with the employer and agree. You can agree even 12 months leave with an employee, provided as you are paying. The law says 28 days. If you want more, you still agree with the employee. So there's no issue about that.
Robin, you have raised your hand. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Robin. Robin. Okay. Hello, Robin, are you around? Okay, I see Elizabeth, you have also raised your hand. Can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I got cut off the first time. My question is to Mr. Eric. During this COVID-19, you said something about having, for sick leave, having a medical certificate. Now, during this COVID-19, we are asked to self-quarantine if you're sick. How does the employer get that medical certificate? You're on mute, Mr. Eric.
Eric.
Yes.
Okay, please respond to that question. I think you're on mute. I've unmuted you as well. Eric, please go ahead.
I said I didn't hear it well. Can you repeat it again?
Okay, my question is, for sick leave, you're supposed to submit a medical certificate to your employer that you're sick, right? Now, according to this COVID-19, if someone is sick, we're advised to self-quarantine. So there's no way, as an employee, I can take my medical certificate to my employer because I'm already sick. I'm supposed to self-quarantine. How does an employer go through that? Go around that? Issuing a sick leave without the medical certificate?
Well, remember, self-quarantine is not probably a treatment, so to say, legally agreed treatment for the COVID-19. However, one of the recommended ways is self-quarantine. So what is required specifically, that's why we said the law did not provide for this pandemic. So here it is using the balance of convenience between the employer and the employee. One of it can be through the normal suitable communication between the employer and the employee for easier way to submit the medical certificate, or maybe after self-quarantine and automatically, then the employee will have to submit it, because by any means, I think every institution has a policy on how to communicate when employee is sick. Usually you may call or you may send someone to someone maybe to the office, but usually there's a way on how you can communicate when a person is sick. So during that communication, that is when an employee can come up and say, maybe I have this medical certificate, I'm supposed to go through self-isolation. And as required, usually, probably will request from the medical practitioner to be very specific on what is the best way on treating you in such a situation. Is it self-isolation of 14 days, 21 days, 30 days, and the like?
Thank you, Eric. Peter, are you around? Yes, I have a question from you from Sunday. He's asking, how does working from home affect psychological health? What can employers do to make sure that the people are staying focused, committed, and happy?
I think it's high time HR should actually be closer to their people, and we should actually manage our employees as parents and pastors. We should actually try to understand what are they going through and address individual issues. So we should actually try our best to make sure we are closer to our employees. We understand what they're going through, and they probably know their specific needs and help them accordingly. Because actually, they're coming to work and they are not happy, they are not okay, performance will go down. So it's high time we should manage by heart, mind, and heart our employees.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yep.
Okay, another question from Stephen is asking, during this COVID-19 situation, business have really slowed down. Can an employer force an employee to go on annual leave?
Yeah.
Eric, can you please respond?
Well, an employer cannot force. Maybe I will go back to my presentation, which says, we touch specifically on unpaid leave. Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Eric.
Yes, yes, I can go specifically to my presentation, which says specifically, an employer cannot force an employee into an unpaid leave. That should be mutually agreed. And any changes into that must be well agreed between employer and employee.
Okay. I see Flavian Joseph, you have raised your hand. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, actually, I have a question directed to Mr. Peter Mapigano.
Yes.
As we know, right now we have COVID-19 challenges, but some of the employees are still working from home. What if COVID-19 will continue to happen in our normal circumstances? And while other professionals need direct or physical operations, especially maybe in administrative operation, even in HR operation. So what are the strategies intended by HR professionals to ensure that we can overcome that circumstances? Thank you.
Okay. I think the first thing is actually to try to transform, move to digital. Also try to provide the training to our employees to know how to use, these facilities, because actually the world now is shifting. Despite the pandemic, the world is already shifting. For instance, we were actually on the IT world. Now we are on data management. So I think my takeaway is actually let us embark now on digitalization, bring on board systems, come up with smart goals. Try to tell our employees to focus not on activities, rather on outcome. it's also high time HR should also drive, the business seat. We should not be just a support function. We should now try to understand, issues of finance, how can actually our institutions navigate from where we are to where we are supposed to be. So I would say, in a nutshell, it's high time that we should go digital.
Maybe it's possible to go digital. For instance, when you can interview a candidate for maybe a job position, you need to determine the candidate actually related to the position advertised, or the current position needs someone. So what measures or strategies you need to detect from that candidate who is needed for that position?
The best method, you can use competence-based interview. Competence-based interview is an interview where you don't even need to meet with the guy. You actually need to come up with competences. For instance, if it's an accountant, what are the competencies for that particular job? So if you are good already having the competences, those competences could actually tell you exactly whether that guy is the right person or not. As you know, interview is one of the lowest ways to give us the right people. So probably we can now move from using interview to competence-based interview, where we can actually come up with the competences. When we are interviewing people, we should base on the competencies for that particular job. For instance, you can have sort of assessment centers, you can have probably assignments, or you can actually try to understand what the employee has done in the past, because that relates to the capability of an employee to work with you in the future.
That's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Peter Mapigani.
You're welcome,
sir. Thank you. I think we have one more person, and then we're going to wind up because I think we're almost done with all the questions. Anna Ringo, you have raised your hand. Can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Anna Ringo.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Actually, I don't have any question. Basically, I just want to say thank you guys, Peter, Eric, and Naike. Thank you guys very much. I think this is very well needed at the moment. And I think you guys should come up with something else in future, because this is very informative. And personally, I got a lot that I didn't know before, now I know. So I just appreciate everything that you guys have done. And I please, beg of you guys to arrange something or organize something more like this one, because we really need it. There's so many things that we really need to know about this. So thank you guys so much. Asanteni sana.
Thank you, Anna. I think we don't have any more questions. If there's anybody who would like to, who had written a question and we did not respond, please just raise your hand and ask the question, and then we're going to close. Okay, I don't see any questions. I would like to take this moment to thank every one of you guys who have taken your time out of your busy schedule to come and listen to us. And I would like to thank the speakers, Eric and Peter, who have shared all the wonderful presentations. We are going to share the recording and the presentation slides. In case you have any more questions, we're going to share all our contacts. And Anna Ringo, we have taken your comment. We're going to continue with this same session so that we are able to learn more and tackle all the different challenges. And I understand that there were some people who were not able to get in because we had a limit of 100 people. So I'm sure you have registered with us. We're going to share all the presentation slides and recording, so you're not going to be left out. So thank you, everyone, and we appreciate your comments, all the wonderful comments that you guys have shared on the chat box. It was a pleasant presentation, indeed it was. It was a learning experience, and remember, it's time for us to learn and learn and relearn. So we're going to continue with these sessions. We're going to keep in touch, and feel free to contact us if you're running into any challenges. You can contact Eric, we'll share all the details. You can contact Peter, and of course you can contact CV people as well. Thank you so much. I don't know if Eric, you have final thoughts, and Peter?
just to say thank you guys. Let's keep in touch, and we are ready anytime to support you guys.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much. Yes, you see, maybe a takeaway point is COVID-19 is a pandemic, so it's something that was not expected by anyone. So both employer and employees need to be cautious. We shouldn't really, they say ignorance of the law is not a defense. So employer and employee must be very conversant to the law and should not take any unilateral action in enforcing or in dealing with this issue. Important is there must be a consultation, bilateral negotiation, and agreement between the employer and the employee. Otherwise, thank you very much for the time, Nike, and also thank you very much, you guys, for listening to us. I hope you learned something as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.